The day I lost my job, I thought the hardest part would be paying the bills. I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the mortgage, wasn't updating my resume, wasn't wondering how long our savings would last. The hardest part was realizing the people I loved had started looking at me differently. Not with disappointment, not exactly. Something quieter than that. One afternoon, my son walked into my garage carrying a broken hedge trimmer. He looked at me, opened his mouth like he was about to ask something, then stopped. "Never mind," he said. "I'll figure it out." He turned around and walked back to his truck. I stood there, holding a wrench, wondering why that hurt more than the day I carried a cardboard box out of the factory. That's when I realized losing my job had cost me more than a paycheck. My name's Frank. I'm 58 years old. For 32 years, I worked at the same manufacturing plant outside Toledo. Started there when I was 26. Figured I'd retire from there, too. I wasn't a manager. Never wanted to be. I liked working with my hands. Machines made sense to me. People, sometimes they didn't. My wife, Linda, and I had been married 34 years. We raised one son, Jason. He had a family of his own now, but he still lived close enough to stop by on weekends. We weren't rich, never were, but every bill got paid. The lights stayed on, the refrigerator stayed full. I called that a win. Every weekday followed the same routine. The alarm went off at 5. I'd shave, pull on the same work jeans. Linda would already be in the kitchen, coffee waiting, my old blue thermos sitting beside my lunchbox. She packed my lunch almost every morning, usually a turkey sandwich, an apple, a bag of chips. Sometimes she'd tuck in a cookie she'd baked the night before. Nothing fancy, just enough to remind me somebody was thinking about me while I was at work. I'd grab my thermos, kiss her on the forehead. "See you tonight." She'd smile. "Drive safe." We probably said those same 2 words a few thousand times over the years. Jason used to call me whenever something broke. The water heater, the washing machine, a loose deck railing. Didn't matter. "Dad, you got a minute?" I'd throw my toolbox in the truck and head over. Half the time, he probably could have fixed it himself, but he'd still ask. Back then, I figured he needed my tools. Looking back, I think he just liked having his dad around. I didn't appreciate that near enough. At the plant, everybody knew everybody. We celebrated retirements, collected money when someone's wife got sick, argued about football every Monday morning. The coffee in the break room tasted terrible. Nobody cared, just part of the place. I knew exactly where I'd be every day, exactly what needed fixing, exactly who depended on me. I never once stopped to wonder what life would feel like without all that. Why would I? I figured I had a few more years before I even needed to think about retirement. Life had other plans. It happened on a Tuesday. Around 9:30, my supervisor walked over. "You got a minute, Frank?" I remember wiping grease off my hands with a red shop rag. "Sure." His face looked different, too serious. He didn't say much as we walked toward the front offices. Inside the conference room sat a woman from Human Resources. There was already a folder on the table, a bottle of water, 3 paper cups. Nobody touched the water. Nobody touched the cups. The HR woman folded her hands. "I'm afraid we've made some difficult decisions." The rest sounded like noise. Restructuring, downsizing, market conditions, position eliminated. 32 years, gone in about 6 minutes. Someone handed me a cardboard box. I cleaned out my locker. An old coffee mug, family picture, a flashlight, 2 pairs of safety glasses, my work gloves. Then I unclipped my security badge. I'd worn that badge every weekday for over 3 decades. I set it on the supervisor's desk. He looked uncomfortable. "So, do I just—" I pointed at the badge. He nodded. "Yeah. I guess that's it." Neither of us knew what else to say. At 10:30 that morning, I pulled into my driveway. I noticed Mrs. Collins across the street peeking through her curtains. She'd never seen me home before lunch. I turned off the engine, but I didn't get out. Sat there 15 minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people drive past, trying to figure out how I was supposed to walk into my own house and tell my wife that after 32 years, I didn't have anywhere to go tomorrow. Finally, I picked up the cardboard box, walked to the front door. Before I could even knock, Linda opened it. She took one look at my face, then at the box, didn't ask a single question, just stepped aside and quietly said, "Come on in." That first evening felt strangely quiet, not because anyone was upset, because nobody knew what to say. Linda made meatloaf, one of my favorites. She set my plate in front of me like she always did. Jason happened to stop by after work to return a ladder he'd borrowed. He walked into the kitchen. "Hey, Dad." Then he noticed I was home. He looked at Linda. She gave him a small shake of her head. He understood right away. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded. "So am I." The 3 of us sat down to eat, forks against plates, ice clinking in glasses. That was about all we heard for 20 minutes. The next morning, I woke up at 5, exactly like always. For a second, everything felt normal. I reached for my work pants hanging over the chair. Then I remembered. There wasn't anywhere to go. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling till Linda's alarm went off. She rolled over. "You don't have to get up." I know, but lying there somehow felt worse. So I got dressed anyway, not in my work clothes, jeans, a sweatshirt. I poured coffee into my blue thermos out of habit. Only after I screwed the lid on did it hit me. It wasn't going anywhere. I poured it back into a mug. The thermos sat on the counter all day. The first week wasn't terrible. There were forms to fill out, unemployment paperwork, a resume I hadn't touched since the late 90s, a few phone calls, a couple online applications. I kept busy enough that I could pretend this was temporary. Every evening, I'd tell Linda, "Something will come along." She'd smile. "I know it will." I believed her, or at least, I wanted to. By the second week, the house started feeling different. Not smaller, quieter. I'd hear Linda vacuuming upstairs, the washing machine running, the mail truck stopping outside. Little sounds I'd never noticed because I was usually at work. Around lunchtime, I'd catch myself looking at the clock, wondering what the guys at the plant were eating. Who was fixing the conveyor belt today? Whether someone had taken my parking spot. Surprised me how much I missed the ordinary stuff. Not the work itself, the routine. Linda never complained, not once. That's what made the little changes so noticeable. At the grocery store, she'd stop in front of something, look at the price, then quietly put it back. One afternoon, I reached for a package of steaks. She smiled politely. "Maybe next week." I put them back without saying anything. Neither of us mentioned it again. But I remembered. The mail became something I dreaded, not because of bills, because every afternoon I hoped there'd be a letter inviting me to an interview. Most days there wasn't. I'd carry the mail inside, flip through it. Advertisements, insurance offers, another credit card application. Nothing with my name on it that mattered. I'd drop the stack on the kitchen table and tell myself, tomorrow would be different. people started asking different questions. Before, it had always been, "How have you been, Frank?" Now it was, "Any luck yet?" Or, "You still looking?" Nobody meant any harm. I knew that. Still. After a while, it felt like my whole identity had gotten boiled down to one answer. "No, not yet." Jason stopped calling as much. At first, I figured he was busy. Young family, full-time job, soccer practice for the kids. Life gets crowded. Then one Saturday, I noticed something. His lawnmower was making a terrible noise. Normally, he'd have called me. Instead, I saw a repair company's truck parked in his driveway. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. A few days later, he stopped by to borrow a ladder again. As he loaded it into his truck, I asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "You get the mower fixed?" He nodded. "Sure did." "You didn't call me." He looked down. "Didn't want to bother you." "Bother me?" "I figured..." He stopped, then shrugged. "I don't know." Neither did I. The garage became the only place that still felt like mine. Every tool hung right where I'd left it. Socket wrenches lined up, workbench clean. Oil stains on the concrete that had probably outlived me. Sometimes I'd spend an hour reorganizing drawers that didn't meet it, just to have something that made sense. One afternoon, I heard Jason's truck pull into the driveway. I smiled. Maybe he'd finally found something that needed fixing. He walked into the garage carrying a broken hedge trimmer. He looked at me, opened his mouth. "Dad." Then he glanced toward the house. Something changed in his face. He lowered the trimmer. "Never mind. I'll figure it out." I waited for him to change his mind. He didn't. Before I could answer, he turned around and walked back to his truck. I stood there, holding a wrench, listening to his engine fade down the street. And for the first time since the layoff, I wondered if losing my job had quietly changed the way my own family looked at me. A few days after Jason left the garage with that hedge trimmer, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe he really didn't want to bother me. But the more I turned it over in my head, the more it felt like something had shifted. Not just in him, in all of us. The next afternoon, I decided to clean the garage. Not because it needed it, just needed something to do. I wiped down shelves, sorted screws into little plastic bins, coiled extension cords that were already neatly coiled. Around 3 o'clock, I heard Linda's voice through the open side door. She was in the kitchen, talking to her sister. Speakerphone was on. I wasn't trying to listen, couldn't help hearing. Linda laughed softly. "No, he's trying." A pause. "I know." Another pause. Then she said something I'll probably remember the rest of my life. "I just don't know who he is anymore." Everything in my hands stopped moving. The rag, the screwdriver, even my breathing. Her sister said something I couldn't make out. Linda answered quietly. "He barely talks. He sits in the garage. He doesn't laugh anymore. I miss him." There wasn't any anger in her voice, only worry. Somehow, that hurt even worse. I quietly closed the toolbox, walked out the side door, around the block, anywhere except back inside. Didn't come home for almost an hour. I sat on a bench at the little park 2 streets over, watched 2 boys throwing a baseball with their father. One of them missed the catch. Ball rolled across the grass. All 3 of them laughed. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. Not because life had gotten terrible, because somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how. That evening, Linda was reading in the living room. I stood in the doorway a while before saying anything. "We need to talk." She looked up right away, closed her book. "Okay." I sat across from her. "I heard you talking to Karen today." Her face changed. "You heard that?" I nodded. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to listen." She looked down at her hands. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "Do you really think I'm different?" She didn't rush to answer. Instead, she asked, "You want me to be honest?" I wouldn't have asked otherwise. She nodded slowly. "Yes." That word landed hard. She reached for her coffee. By then, it had gone cold. She took a sip anyway. "You stopped talking." I looked at the floor. "You stopped laughing." Another pause. "You stopped asking me how my day was." "I figured you had enough to worry about." "I did," she nodded. "But I still wanted my husband." She looked at me a long time before saying the sentence that finally broke through all the excuses I'd been making for myself. "I didn't lose my husband when the factory closed. I lost him after." I didn't know what to say, because she was right. I'd spent weeks believing everyone else had changed. Jason, Linda, friends, neighbors. Maybe they had, but I'd changed first. I stopped making coffee for both of us in the morning, stopped teasing Linda about watching the same detective shows she'd already seen twice, stopped asking Jason how work was going. Every conversation turned into applications, interviews, money, the future. I wasn't living in the house anymore. I was living inside my own head. The next morning, I found myself standing in the garage again, looking at the empty hook where my factory badge used to hang. And it hit me. For 32 years, I'd known exactly who I was. I fixed machines. People counted on me. Problems showed up. I solved them. Then one Tuesday morning, that version of me disappeared. Nobody had taught me what came after. Late that Saturday, Jason stopped by. No broken tools this time. No lawnmower, no hedge trimmer. Just himself. He stood in the garage doorway. "You busy?" I almost laughed. "Not anymore." He smiled awkwardly. "Mind if I hang out a while?" We spent the next half hour moving boxes that didn't really need moving, sweeping a floor that was already clean. Neither of us said much. The silence felt different this time. Not uncomfortable, just unfinished. Finally, Jason leaned against the workbench. "Dad," I looked up. "I never stopped respecting you." I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't know how to help." Those words stuck with me. All those weeks I'd convinced myself my family had started seeing me as less of a man. The truth hurt a lot less than I'd imagined. They'd been waiting for me to come back, and I hadn't realized I was the one keeping my distance.